We are so excited to have a moderator for today's event. We don't always get the opportunity to work with one, but we're always super excited when we do. So everybody, without further ado, please put your hands together for Bookborn Reviews.
Hi everybody, I'm super excited to be here tonight with authors that everyone obviously here knows and loves. So I'd love to introduce Fonda Lee and Shannon Lee and have them come out and join me. They probably need no introduction to this crowd, but I'm going to introduce them anyway. So we have Shannon Lee, who is the CEO of the Bruce Lee Family Companies and the chairperson of Bruce Lee Foundations, and is also written the nonfiction Be Water, My Friend, and is the daughter of Bruce Lee. We are so happy to have you here tonight.
Thank you so much.
And then we have Fonda Lee, who is the author of the acclaimed series, The Greenbone Saga, as well as the novella Untethered Sky and some other YA novels. We are so happy to also have you here tonight. So we're going to celebrate the release of The Breath of the Dragon, which is co-authored by our authors and is a YA fantasy, and it is so fantastic. And of course, we just want to talk about how that came to be and how you guys came to write this book together.
Sure, thank you so much. So my father wrote many creative writings, actually. He created a number of treatments for film and television and even some scripts. And I've had these things in my possession for a long time. If anyone's watched the show Warrior, then you know that that's based on one of his treatments. And so one of the things about these treatments is they're all very different in terms of where they take place and sort of the circumstances of the worlds that they're in, but they all have very common themes. So it's mostly always about a martial artist on some sort of journey of self-realization. And even sometimes he would reuse character names in some of these different treatments. And so as I was reading through them, I started to think, I wonder if there's a way to weave these ideas, these characters, some of these themes into one world and one narrative. And so I started working on a treatment for a book series, and that worked on that for a while, brainstorming. And then at some point I thought, okay, I have something that I'd love to share, but I've never written fiction. So, if I wanted to try to write it, it might end up taking 10 or 15 years to get it, to fruition. So I really wanted to work and collaborate with another author. And so I was introduced to Fonda's works by my literary agent and started to read and learn about Fonda. And then we got on the phone and were introduced. And I'll pass it to Fonda from here.
So yeah, I was in a point in this journey where I had just finished a big epic fantasy trilogy, The Greenbone Saga, and I was casting about for my next project. I had some ideas in mind. I had pitched a new project to my editor. I had sort of next books lined up, and my agent said, Shannon Lee would like to talk to you. And I did a double take because that's not a call that you get very often. And I discovered that not only was she a fan of fantasy and was familiar with my work, she wanted to use her father's scripts and philosophies and filmed as inspiration for a young adult fantasy series. And it felt like a project that had my name written on it, literally. So if you've read any of my previous work, you know how much martial arts has been a huge influence on me. I've been practicing for many, many years. Asian history and culture, obviously a huge inspiration for me as well. And Bruce Lee has been such a influential figure for me as well, just not as a martial artist and as an Asian American. And this was such a great opportunity for me to really do something that I'd never done before, which was collaborate on a novel project. And it wasn't something that I had ever thought that I would do. But as I got talking to Shannon, I thought, this just feels right. It feels like a project that we'll be able to do together and we'll make something great out of it. And so we started brainstorming and pulling the story threads together, coming up with a proposal, and then we were fortunate enough to find a publisher that an editor that loved it as much as we did, and the rest is history. And I have a book.
Yay!
Ta-da!
I was curious about when you started working with your father's treatments. Were they already fantasy in nature? Or was that something you wanted to bring to it? Why fantasy and why young adults?
That's a great question. Thank you. Let me think. I mean, I'm like, what is the definition of fantasy? Not all of them were fantasy. I mean, some were very straight ahead action, modern day for his time. But he did have one story treatment that took place in ancient China and had, sort of a tournament arc to it. And then there was one treatment that took place in the future, which was 1987. So, and I was like, yeah, that's not what 1987 was like. But so I guess there were some slight sci-fi or ancient mystical pieces to it. But for me, as Fonda said, I'm a huge fan of fantasy. It was one of my early loves as a young reader. And for me, I just thought that being able to pull together a world that had fantasy elements, but was still very grounded. We didn't want something that was like high magic, with people casting spells and all that kind of stuff. It had to fit within the Bruce Lee canon, right? But to get to play and be a little creative was also really fun. In terms of YA, it was really important for me to want to write something that could appeal to a younger generation. A lot of my father's fans are older, even if they're older young adults, like in their 20s or but all of his films are rated R. They're, a lot of it is more adult leaning. And so this was an opportunity to be able to sort of introduce some of these ideas and themes and him tangentially, by going with young adult.
I mean, why fantasy is sort of a non-question for me. I feel like everything is made better by fantasy. Take any genre, any story, and then you add magic or mecha or vampires, and it's instantly improved. So I was, of course, very glad that Shannon wanted to take these ideas and put them in a speculative setting, which gave us a lot of creative freedom. And I didn't think I would go back to writing young adult because I had written young adult early on in my career. And then the Greenbone saga sucked up many years of my life and became the work that I was most well known for. So I had a bunch of ideas going forward, and they were all adult ideas. So I thought, well, if I ever go back to young adult, it'll probably be way down the line. I don't have a YA project top of mind right now. So when Shannon approached me about this, it was like the YA project I didn't know that I needed, or it was a great way for me to kind of reconnect with that side of my career and continue to be able to publish in both categories.
Awesome. Yeah, and as co-authors, I'm sure you guys brought different things to the project, which I'm really interested in. One thing, for example, I know that one of your father's philosophies you talk about a lot is self-actualization, and I definitely saw that all over June's journey in this book. It was stuck out to me immediately. And for you, Fonda, last time we chatted, you talked about how dysfunctional family dynamics are something you accidentally return to a lot. And I also saw that all over this novel. And I had heard that actually June having a twin was something you introduced, which I think upped the family dynamic. So I'd love to hear about your co-author journey and what you guys kind of individually brought to the project and how that worked together.
Why don't you start? I've been leading off.
You're absolutely right. One thing that happens, I think, when you are a multiple published author is you realize there's certain themes that you keep coming back to. And consciously or unconsciously, at some point you're like, this crops up a lot. I must be working through something. That's what we authors do. We put our souls out onto the page, and we do that instead of therapy. For me, I think family dynamics and family relationships have just always been something that I come back to in my work quite a bit. Almost all of everyone, just about every single one of my books has some family relationships that are very tied to the struggles and the tensions and the journey of the characters. And when we started working on Breath of the Dragon, we had an idea of the overall structure for this duology, and it went from being initially a trilogy concept to a duology concept because we realized there were so many themes involving duality. So there's a realm that has been divided into East and West. There was a natural structure that we wanted a tournament arc in the first book, and then we wanted the pagoda was going to be big part of the second book. And we're like, that's a great way to split the story. And then this there was this element that I was like, there's got to be more of like a personal stake involved in this duality theme that's emerging. And so in one of the drafts, I don't remember which one, but we were reworking the beginning, and then this idea of Jun having a twin brother kind of really propelled the story to that level where the character arc really found kind of its heart. And from there, like, I think the story arc just came together in a really beautiful and natural way. But yeah, like messed up families, I don't know why. Just come back to them.
Yeah, and in terms of, self-actualization, it's definitely was one of my father's, if not his main sort of philosophy from which many others branch. And so, and for him as a human being, he worked on himself a lot. For me as a human being, I work on myself a lot. I think we all actually are on a journey of self-actualization, whether we're calling it that or not. We're always sort of assessing ourselves and our choices and our actions and our decisions and trying to, figure out how to life better, And so one of the things that's always really important to me in terms of anything that I do regarding my father's work and legacy and or my own is that I want that little bit of philosophy, that little bit of, make you think a little bit about life in a certain way, weaved into whatever I'm doing. Even if it's just like a Bruce Lee t-shirt, I want like one of his quotes on there or, something like that. So it was very important to me to write, for both of us, I think, for us to write a book that was very entertaining, regardless of whether you're a Bruce Lee fan or know anything about Bruce Lee, but then also to weave in there these ideas and these themes and these philosophies and a lot of Easter eggs. So if you're a Bruce Lee fan, there are a lot of Easter eggs in the book. But you didn't need to know any of that in order to enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. And I know everyone, if they know Bruce Lee's name, but they definitely associate it more with martial arts than necessarily his philosophy.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing it was important when you're introducing a new generation to make sure that was weaved throughout the novel.
100%. And also, it was what my father did himself in his lifetime. So, if you've seen the movie Under the Dragon, it's a hardcore, awesome action, martial arts drama, right? But all of those scenes, the finger pointing at the moon, the art of fighting without fighting, it hits all by itself, like these little tidbits that are woven in there as part of the story were his contributions to that movie. Because it was important for him to be able to like sort of slip in a little medicine with that spoonful of action sugar.
And speaking of the action sugar, though, I'm curious because I know, Fonda, obviously the Greenbone Saga has, well, all of your stories have a lot of martial arts in them. And Greenbone Saga, though, was more weapon in general fighting with martial arts. And this had a lot of non-weapon fighting. And since it was inspired by Bruce Lee's life, I wondered how you went about writing the fight scenes. Did you prepare for those in a different way? Did you do it from your own experiences, or just how that came about?
Not really. I feel like writing fight scenes is something that is just really fun for me. And I've written a lot of combat scenes that don't have any relevance to my training, including fighting with magic rocks and fighting in space and with alien armor, like all sorts of. So, but I do love a great action scene, of course. And I think part of that stems from being a martial artist and just appreciating and knowing how hard it is, how much training goes into being a good fighter, and admiring those who can do it incredibly well. So that certainly motivates my desire to see some of, that incredibly skillful combat translate into my stories. But when it comes to actually the tactics of writing them, I approach them very much the same way across the board, whether they have a speculative element or whether they're just kind of, raw knuckle fist fight. And it really just comes down to a few principles. One being that an action scene has to propel the narrative forward. It has to do multiple things. It's not just a physical conflict. It has to have emotional stakes. It has to reveal character. It has to change character. It has to do some world building from time. So all of that is to say that like I often do see the scene unfolding in my head like a movie, and then I'm transcribing how it's happening. But that first draft of it gets rewritten, smoothed over, revised, edited a lot, because my goal is that by the time you reach that scene, that it feels both surprising and inevitable that it would come to this, and that when you're reading it, you're not noticing the words. Hopefully I'm doing the same thing to the reader that I'm experiencing, which is that the words just kind of blend away and you're sort of seeing it unfold in your mind. And with a book like this, it's a really fun challenge to make every scene feel unique and different, because it is a tournament arc. There's going to be multiple fight scenes, and in what order they're going to happen, right? There's going to be opening rounds, and eventually there's going to be quarterfinals and semifinals, and so there's already a structure in place. So how do you make them feel fresh? How do you make every single one of them feel different? And that's the fun part.
And you did a good job.
I watched a lot of Bruce Lee movies.
I was going to say, you talked about Easter eggs. Did you specifically ask her to put any fighting Easter eggs in?
I don't think I ever was like, make sure you put this in there or that in there. I think one of the things that was so beautiful about this collaboration is that Fonda was already very knowledgeable about my father and about martial arts. And, in preparation for this, rewatched all of his movies and all of that. So I'm sure there were a few things where I was like, hey, what if we put this quote here, and what if we shifted this? But Fonda very seamlessly grabbed a lot of those things. And in particular, because before we started, aside from the initial treatment, I sent her a lot of the my father's writings to read. So then she had a big grab bag full of goodies to work with.
Yeah. There's definitely some fighting Easter eggs in there.
Yes.
Some of the opponents, especially, we've got some
Easter eggs. Awesome. We talked about a little bit earlier about you introducing June's twin. Was there anything else that's not spoilery that you guys could talk about later in the process that either you, Fonda, or you, Shannon, added, like as you guys were collaborating, that you guys kind of came up with together and as you evolved the story?
Well, I will say that in this world, the sort of main supreme deity is dragon. And dragon, there are these scrolls in that contain this wisdom of dragon and that are made from dragon skin. And, this was always a part of the story from the beginning. But Fonda, we were trying to figure out the magical sort of element and mystical element of this. And we knew we didn't want it to be like over the top, but we were kind of like, well, what is going to be the mechanism for this? And Fonda came up with the idea to have it be that some people in this world are born with small patch of dragon scales on their body somewhere, and that announces to the world that they have some sort of special ability. And this is not a spoiler because you sort of learn this right up in the prologue. The difference between the two twins is that one is breathmarked. That's what having the dragon scales is called, and the other is not. And so it was a really that was something that was added by Fonda, and in our creative discussions, which I think was brilliant.
I think one of the things, that was I would say it was added later. It was there from the beginning, but I think one thing that I really appreciated that Shannon did was include was Ren's character, because Shannon's daughter is named Ren, and that was an important part of the story from the beginning for her, was this character Ren, especially because a lot of Bruce Lee films did not have main female characters.
Right.
So that was a big thing that, as both women and martial artists, and we wanted to make sure that that was something that was in our book. And so from the beginning, Ren was his main character, but a lot of her development and what she goes through, I think Shannon really sort of it was always a priority for you. And especially I think as we go into the second book, I feel like that was definitely something that Shannon always had her eyes on, was like how, what's Ren's role here, what's her development, what's kind of like what's going on for her, and because she's not a point of view character, so it's not as easy when you have a single point of view character to build out a secondary character with the same level of depth as you do your main character. So that was it was a challenge, but like a good one, to make sure that her storyline was never lost and that she had a full arc and journey of her own.
And I'll just add that, I do see my role in the Bruce Lee verse as making sure that there are strong female characters, because there really weren't. A lot of the treatments did not have, if any, strong female characters. They weren't. If any female characters, they weren't that strong. And so even on Warrior, when that TV show, I was always had my eye on the female characters and okay, no, that's too damsel in distress, that kind of thing. So
that's awesome. I very much appreciate that, obviously, as a woman who reads a lot of fantasy. So I think that's really great. Something else that changed that we were talking about earlier was the title. The title of both the duology and the book changed. And I'd love for you guys to talk about how that came about. If the breathmarked ability came later and now it's called the breathmarked series, that is clear. But yeah, that it changed. But maybe why or how that developed.
Yeah. Originally, the original titles of the books were Scroll of Earth and Scroll of Heaven.
The duality.
The duology. And that's because there are two scrolls that are separated in this world. And we actually really loved
Yeah.
the title.
I still love the title.
But the publisher wanted something that signaled more action, something a little bit more active in general. And, we were okay with that too. And,
Yeah. I think they thought like scroll was too, I don't know, scholarly. Didn't sound like there was enough punching. I don't know. But I have been through now multiple title changes in my career. I'm trying to think of which ones were my original one. I mean, the Greenbone Saga, all those books were my titles. And I'm pretty sure, and Zero Box Search was my debut. But all the others changed. And I've learned now in this process that the key is when your publisher wants to change your title, don't wait for them to give you suggestions. Give them a whole bunch of suggestions, including the ones that are real turds. So that when you suggest, the one that you're okay with, they'll take that one.
Is that what happened here, or?
that's a little literary kung fu right there. We did brainstorm a ton of titles, when they said that they would like to find a different one.
I very much did not want to end up with, Wrath of Fire and Brimstone, or whatever. There were a bunch of titles that included like Wrath and, Fire and
Fury
and
yeah.
yeah.
Because I was curious originally before I realized that there was a title change. Because it's interesting, the two scrolls would go with what you guys were saying about trying to make two sides. But I thought Dragon might be trying to be a reference, since a lot of Bruce Lee's famous movies have dragon in them. So I didn't know if that was part of the reasoning, or if it was really all just because they needed something more action forward.
I mean, well, so my father was born in the year of the dragon,
Right.
and in the hour of the dragon, and his Chinese name was Little Dragon.
Okay.
So the fact that
yes.
dragon is sort of this supreme being of this
Blood
world.
dragon.
Yeah, blood dragon. So that's one of the Easter eggs. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of references, and some of them are very subtle in this, like the two twin names, Jun and Sai, are both referenced to Chinese names of my father's, whether they were nicknames or given names that he had as well. So it is, there's a lot of that weaved through. But yes, I mean, the dragon reference was sort of like, and his movies are Enter the Dragon and Way of the Dragon, and they're called that because he was the dragon. So.
So I was talking to you guys earlier about this as well, because of the breathmarked. I would love to know, if you could have a breathmarked ability, what it would be. Because I always think that is a fun question to ask authors when they get to come up with their own fantasy worlds.
So one of the key features of the breath marks in this world is that they're not superpowers per se. And this very much ties into what we were talking about with the philosophy that we wanted to transmit through the stories. Was so much of the story is about John kind of dealing with the insecurity that he's not breath marked, and learning in the process that like the breath marks, even though they are the gift, they are not a superpower. They're still something that you have to harness, that requires work and training and dedication in order to put them to their best use. And everyone has those gifts, whether they have some overt scales on their body or not. So the breath marks confer some sort of special advantage in some area, but they're not going to make you fly or teleport. So my usual answer to like, what superpower would you have? Which, by the way, would be teleportation. Don't apply. But the breath mark gift that I would like to have is the ability to fall asleep instantly anywhere.
Why?
Because I used to be a fantastic sleeper. And I'm not that, and like I remember as a young person being able to be like, oh, just fall asleep on, I don't know, the plane for an hour. But I would love to be able to be, and as someone who is a night owl who tends to stay up too late and then lies awake, like going through everything that I need to do, I would love the ability to just be like, I'm gonna sleep, bam, and then like wake up instantly when I need to. That would be my breathmark ability.
I like that. I like that, especially as a 55-year-old woman in a certain stage of life who doesn't sleep as well as she used to. And I would just see your sleep and add like, and then my body doesn't hurt if I fall asleep in a weird position.
Right, that's a
But if I could have a breath mark ability, it would probably be akin to something along the lines of being able to connect, to be able to cultivate the skill of connecting and connecting and communicating directly with dragon. You know, I mean, there are people who have psychic abilities in or claim to, depending on what you believe or don't believe, in this world, right? And so, like, that sort of like enlightened guidance would be something, you know, that I would, as me, Shannon, like to have.
Yeah, I will say that is probably more useful than the falling asleep in battle scenario. Just like if we're talking about a tournament scenario, you know, you would be the one who'd be impressive to look at, like, oh, I have a
for
breath
sure.
marked, but then it would not be
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah. And there's some characters like that
Yeah.
in the series where it's like they have a breath mark, but their breath mark is like extremely minor.
Yeah. Or, I mean, that wouldn't be minor. It just wouldn't be useful necessarily.
No,
in
that
all
is true.
scenarios.
I mean, if I'm thinking of this as myself now, as opposed to like 20-year-old me who is still in martial arts competition mode, I might choose a different breath mark. But if I had to have one now,
yes,
that would be more useful.
we're much more practical now.
Right.
But you'd always well rested.
Exactly.
Which, as a martial artist, is
Yeah,
useful.
Is very useful. Yeah. I mean, as a parent, it's extremely useful.
Well, that's true because, you know, tournaments are stressful. So I guess being able to just fall asleep without anything on your mind, maybe it would be more useful than I gave it credit
Yeah.
for. So I take
I
it
mean,
back.
even on tour and adjusting to time zones,
Yeah,
right?
totally. I mean,
Hard selling this breath.
like, I feel like I'm like, dude, you just totally, like, skipped over the most obvious one, which you just said, which is to be able to empty your mind.
Oh.
And which is very Bruce Lee, by the way. Like, to just be, like, turning it off.
Hence for me.
Yeah. I'd like to be able to do it without falling asleep.
Anytime, anywhere, blank mind.
Exactly.
I want to warn everyone, we are going to open up for Q&A soon. We're going to ask one or two more questions. So just be thinking in your mind if you have any questions for our authors today, just to give you guys a little heads up. I want to ask you guys if you are currently reading anything, any fantasy books that you're currently reading or excited to get to read. They don't have to be new, but...
I was literally grilling Fonda in the car on the way over. I was like, what books should I be reading? What is an awesome fantasy tome that I should be digging into? But she gave me some names, so which I can't repeat to you right now. They're written down on my phone. The book I am currently reading right now is called Fool's Crow, and it's a Native American story that takes place at the time of, you know, the colonizing of the Europeans of the United States. That's what I'm currently reading right
Is
now.
it a nonfiction? Fiction?
No, it's
Fantasy?
fiction.
Okay,
It's
it's
fiction.
fiction.
I'm about halfway through.
So one of the perks of being an author is you get arcs months and months before the book comes out.
You don't need to brag, but what are you about to brag about?
So there is a book coming out next, well, not, it is now the year. I was going to say next year. I'm like this year, called The Phoenix Pencil Company. And it is by a debut author, Allison King. And it takes place, well, there's two timelines, but one of the timelines takes place in the modern era and one in wartime Shanghai. And it is about a family that they have the power to, well, they make pencils, they run a pencil factory, but they have this power to be able to take the stories out of the pencils. And so it's pencil magic, but it's a lot more than that too. And I highly recommend it. So keep an eye out for that one. I am looking forward to the second book in Robert Jackson Bennett's trilogy, the first one being The Tainted Cup. And I can't remember the name of the second one that's coming out, but I'm really looking forward to that one. The first one was, it's a detective story, so it's got that kind of like Gene Wolfe vibes to it, a bit of a Sherlock Watson dynamic, but it's a really unique and cool magic system that has like some eldritch horrors and kind of a biopunk vibe to it.
Sounds amazing. We're going to move into Q&A, but I do want to say, even though I know you guys haven't read Breath of the Dragon yet, it's great, and you're going to want to read the second one. And you guys said that the second one should be out in 2026. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I want to give everyone that as well, that it's coming out sooner rather than later, which is really exciting. So I'm going to pass this microphone to you. If you just want to raise your hand if you have a question, and we have someone ready to go right here.
Oh, hello, sorry. I just have a question for Shannon Lee. What did you love the most about your father?
Ooh.
Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
Yeah, no. I guess what I would say is that the thing I love the most about my father is tied to my strongest memory of my father. I was 4 when my father died, so I don't have a lot of strong, visual memory or strong, long memory about him. A little bit, little flashes here and there. But what I do remember about him was how he felt and how he made me feel, and his aura or energy. He was extremely good at being present with you, and he was extremely playful and joyful and intense. But when he was focused on you as his child, there was just this sense that I developed this connection to him, this bond to him that made me feel warm and safe and seen, that I think is something we're all looking for in our lives, as we move through. And I have that from him. And so that is something that I carry with me inside of me to this day. And so I would have to say that it was probably something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So as somebody who's also currently co-writing a novel with a friend of mine, I was wondering if you guys had any tips on how to, successfully collaborate as authors.
Yeah.
So I'll say that I know a lot of writers who have co-written projects, and every single pair of writers does it differently. And it really comes down to what works for the two of you, and how to play to each other's strengths the best. I know some writer duos where one person is the dialogue and scene setting person, other person is the action person. I know some writer duos where one person is more of the outliner and the other person is the drafter. I know somebody who they have split it by POV. So one person writes one POV, the other person. So in short, my piece of advice would be to have a talk about what you both most like to do and write, and how you see yourselves best playing to your strengths. And then the other thing I will say is just have a lot of communication, be a lot of open communication. And don't be precious about anything, right? Because there are times when we talk about stuff and it's like we're batting ideas back and forth and just spitballing and anything goes. And like one of us will propose an idea and the other's like, what about this instead? And we're like, what about this? And if you are writing a book on your own, you have only yourself, right, to bounce ideas off of. But when you're writing with someone else, they're a resource. They're another brain. And so most of the books I write myself, I can spend a lot of time banging my head against the wall. But with a writing partner, you just throw the draft over the wall to them and see what they think. So a lot of communication and just being on the same page, playing to your individual strengths, so that ideally the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, for us, I had this initial concept, and then we started talking, and we did a lot of upfront back and forth and outlining and talking through a lot of things. And then Fonda did the initial writing, and then she would send pages to me, and I would go through and ask questions or revise certain parts and things like that. So, and then as it went on, there was a lot of back and forth to just sort of tighten things up. I'm extremely grateful to her for drafting the first draft. Because I would have been like, but I would say, I collaborate a lot with writers in the film and TV world also. And there are things that I have the initial idea for, and you're sort of holding on to this, but this is how I like it. And then other people start playing with your idea, and it can get really easy to be like, but that's not what I wanted. But I have just found that the more open that you can be and sort of be like, let's just see where this goes. I mean, for me, I always have one boundary that is really easy for me to maintain, which is, does this fit within the energetic boundaries of the Bruce Lee legacy? If it doesn't, like I had somebody come and say, we want to do a movie where Bruce Lee, it's a buddy cop film, and Bruce Lee is one of the characters, and they wanted to bring him back in CG and make him a cop. And I was like, yeah, no. We're not doing that. So if there was something where I'm like, I don't know, that never really happened here because Fonda was so educated, right? But being really open to the ideas and following them a little bit and see, can I start to get into this? Like, do I like this? It can, and like she said, the two of us together were able to build this and blossom this into something much better than it originally started as.
I was lucky enough to have already read the book. I got an arc of it. But so I'm kind of wondering, spoiler free, if in the second book the point of view is going to change, or if you feel comfortable asking that question. I definitely see the potential for it, but it would be great either way. Just curious if that is a possibility.
So the story stays with Jen's POV, but there are some significant secondary characters come into play.
Yeah. That's pretty much it.
Hello.
Hi.
I have a question about the Jade City trilogy. So, in the books, Jade plays a bunch of roles. It's part of people's culture. There's a lot of ritual attached to it. It's a export of a country, so it's more like the historical spice trade. It's also a performance-enhancing drug, in my view at least. I imagine that you had like one or two of these things that you kept in your head as you were writing about it, and I'm curious what those were. Like, did you see it more as a drug, more as a cultural thing? Yeah.
All of the above. Yeah. One of the beauties of working in fantasy is that you are sort of turning a mirror on real life, but you are doing so in a way where you can use a speculative element that doesn't exist in real life to shine a brighter light. And for me, Jade was a allegory for all sorts of things in our world. Money, power, drugs. So I did a whole bunch of research into the De Beers diamond monopoly, for example, and how the diamond trade was essentially created with this cartel, and people were sold the idea that the only acceptable stone for an engagement ring was the diamond. So there's a lot of interesting stuff to pull from real life, and I also did a ton of research into the historical nature of jade and the cultural value that has been afforded in East Asian culture for a very long time, the spiritual associations with it, and I looked at how the Yakuza use their full body tattoos as status symbols. Right, so that played a lot into how the jade is worn and displayed in this warrior honor culture. All of those things. But what I often do when I write fantasy is I have these vague ideas of things in our world that are going to influence it. So I do a whole bunch of research, and then I make a whole bunch of notes, and then I set it aside and I just write and try to create a world where the speculative element feels like it's an organic part of that world and is kind of woven into all the elements. So I wanted Jade very much to be a part of day-to-day life in this fantasy world and have a spiritual element, right? It's used in religion. There's an economic element because it's exported. There's a large political element. There are cultural elements. There's sporting implications. So all of those.
Hi, I have a question for Fonda. So I'm almost finished the Greenbone saga. I have 80 or so pages left of Jade's legacy. And so for all of the emotional damage you caused me, and surely will cause me,
You're not even done yet.
may I offer you a clean blade?
I get to choose the weapon now. Usually people just offer to send me their therapy bills. This
is another kind of fun. Which character from the Greenbone saga would you think would be the best candidate for a guardian in the breathmarked series?
Oh. You have an answer?
Andon.
Andon is my favorite character, so great choice. That's all the time we have tonight. I did want to bring up one last thing I forgot to bring up earlier, which is I found out that Bruce Lee's first martial arts school was actually in Seattle. Is that true?
That is correct.
And so I thought it was such a cool fact to end. This is the last stop on your tour, and I thought that was very apropos. So that was very exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having a conversation with us tonight. We are so grateful that we got to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.